going to talk with Brian Johnson tonight about her career and influence in the medical device industry. Cindy is the president and general manager for the 3M Infection Prevention Division, a business committed to keeping patients safe from healthcare-associated infections and complications. She's a 20-plus year healthcare veteran. She's the global head of the 3M Healthcare Business Group's largest and most complex business. Previously, Cindy served as president and general manager of 3M's Drug Delivery System Division and vice president strategy, business development, and U.S. medical key accounts, which is really, that's what I really love. That was a small job, right? It was very, very compressed. She's received numerous awards for her leadership and commitment to healthcare. She is among the Women's Health Leadership Trust top 35 women's leaders in the healthcare industry, and she is a member of the Committee of 200, an invitation-only membership organization of the world's most successful women's business leaders. Let's extend a warm welcome to Cindy.
You're worried about the stairs, I'm worried about the stage. Can't fall off.
Well, don't worry. Don't upstage me. I'll handle the pratfalls.
No falling tonight. Yeah.
Handle the home runs here. So, Jeremy's intro neglected to mention, recently you were hanging out with Oprah.
Hanging out may be an overstatement, but we were friendly, and I have pictures and flowers to show for it. Yeah.
How does that come about? How do you end up? You're the only, maybe the only. I've interviewed leaders, and one of them said, "Oh, I turned down Vice President Biden to be here tonight." But I gotta say, not a single one of them ever hung out with Oprah. So what was the occasion and how did
Well, I didn't turn her down to be here tonight, so let's start with the truth. But I love giving back, and that's one of the big things that's very important for me, and one of the things that my career and role at 3M affords me are invites to speak. And particularly being a woman of color in STEM field, I was invited to the Johnson C. Smith, which is a historic black college and university, HBCU, in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I was their baccalaureate speaker. So essentially I had to preach, because I'm also an ordained minister, which I don't think Jeremy mentioned. So I was in my full ministerial regalia, and the Gates Foundation had just given them a contribution about 18 months ago to build a 62,000 square foot STEM science center. So I was hosting a reception for all of their faculty and graduating seniors in STEM fields. And as we were ending the night, walking out, the president and the chairman of the board pulled me to the side, and they're looking at each other very strangely. And they said, "We think we should tell her." "Well, do you think we should?" "Well, are you gonna tell her?" And I'm like, "Somebody, tell me something." And so they leaned over, very sheepish smiles, and they says, "Well, Oprah's gonna be there tomorrow, and we don't want you to be nervous." And so, and I says, "Oprah as in, what's her last name?" And so it was the Oprah, and she was indeed there. And a couple of maybe observations about that. So what I wrestled with, which kind of gets to your opening, and I really appreciated your comments about the things that you're grateful for. One of the things that when I got home to the hotel, I had already prepared my message for the evening, and it went through my head, oh my gosh, as I read through it, is there anything that might offend her, and what should I do? And I just had to turn the player off. I had to push pause on that inner voice saying, you're here for the students, the graduating seniors. You're here to send them off into the world with your greatest words of wisdom and ministerial and spiritual support. You can't pander because of who's in the audience, literally. And all of the calm, that I received from that. And I did that. It was for the students. And one of her girls from her South African school was graduating in the senior class. And she says, "Well, I can't be at graduation, but I can make that baccalaureate." And she was there front row by herself. She clapped and cried and stood up on her feet the whole time. And I didn't learn until 3 weeks later that she was actually supposed to be ushered out 30 minutes before the service ended. And I saw her security. She had a really large security detail. She told them not to to escort her out because she wanted to stay to greet me. And she greeted me and hugged me and told me it was amazing. And then when I got back into the office the following Tuesday after Memorial Day, there was a huge basket of peonies that she had shipped here with a handwritten card. So it's very special. It's now preserved and framed forever. Forever.
That's very cool. I like that, though, that you sort of said, I can't speak just to Oprah. I have to actually
No.
stick to there seems to be a larger leadership lesson there.
Absolutely. You know, and you think about a lot of things. Who are you in this for, right? Of what are the right priorities? And I think the other leadership lesson is sometimes, whether it's yourself and your inner voice or people around you, you need people to remind you of what you're in it for, right? And so for me, part of that is also the advancement and the climb. And I just shared this with a group. I was speaking to a group in retail it's called the Network of Executive Women, had their conference for their rising stars here in Minnesota. What's today? Monday? On Thursday afternoon. And it was about 200 rising stars, emerging leaders. And that was one of the lessons for me. You know, people say, well, how did you make it this fast? And what's the formula to your career? And for me, this is not the main thing. The main thing is I was first college graduate in my family, first generation college graduate. I'm putting 2 of my cousins through college now, and they will be the first male graduates. And it's all the things that the career affords me that's the priority, and never forgetting. Otherwise, making a wrong turn or worried about one presentation as opposed to the main thing is being a role model for my family. It's about doing the right thing in my community. It's about honoring the gift that I've been given in terms of spiritual development and ministry. And career is a part of it, but it's not the only thing.
So the theme of this conference is building better companies and building better products. And you're an engineer by training,
I am.
I'm sure you're pretty good at building products, but I read that you enjoyed building people. And I'd like to jump into that here. So who, for lack of a better phrase, were the people who built you into who you are today?
Yeah, there have been many. And I think that's one of the reasons where I know that's why giving back and advancing talent is so important to me, is because so many people poured into me, right? So being first generation college and the first person in corporate America, there was no playbook. I didn't know how to be in industry. I didn't know how to sit in a business meeting. I didn't know what a boardroom looked like. And so it was mentors from very early on. My very first mentor who became a sponsor, and there is a difference, and I'm hoping that everyone here knows and recognizes that. But it was a mentor who became a sponsor who's now deceased. His name was Paul Johnson, and he was the Senior Vice President of Supply Chain and Operations for Eli Lilly at the time. And I was a newly minted engineer about 6 months into my career, and I had volunteered for this thing called Diversity and Inclusion, which was the beginning. It was the early 90s, and it wasn't as swanky as it is today. And they said, we want a team together at the plant site, and I was in rural Indiana, in cornfields. And I signed up, and I had a lot of energy around the topic and wanted to do some training. And the first meeting, he says, you've got these ideas, a lot of ideas. Meet me for lunch, and let's talk about what we want to do with diversity for the plant site. No problem. The next luncheon was a similar thing of we've trained this many people, what barriers, what do you think is getting in the way? And so not letting levels, it could easily have been that I would be intimidated when an SVP come and ask you your ideas and you're 21 years old, fresh out of school. Maybe that's when I had my best ideas because it was before all the constraints of what I'm supposed to say and political correctness had kicked in. And I gave him my ideas. By the third luncheon, a few months later, it was not what should we do with this committee. It was, where do you want to take your career? And I said, what was true, I don't know, I've never seen anything else. I had gone to school as an engineer, I'm working designing these research laboratories in a manufacturing plant. I think I want to work with customers. I didn't even know what that meant, but I wanted to see what happens after these big bags of powder, which was the active ingredients for finished products somewhere else. What happens to what my product of what we're doing on this plant site? I don't know what strings he pulled, but within 6 months, which was now a little over a year into my career, I was in Detroit, Michigan selling product as a primary care sales rep. And after that, he made this commitment to me, which he honored before he passed away. He said, Cindy, we see a lot of potential in you. So you take the next 5 years on us and you go play and you go work in as many disciplines and fields as you like. And in 5 years, we're gonna come and ask you what you wanna do for this company, and we expect an answer. And so I did the sales for 6 months and was the highest sales rep in the 5-state region. And then I came back and did an HR stint for 2 years, and from HR, I went to marketing, and that's where it was almost like a handoff. So Paul's like, okay, my stint is finished. I can't do anything past manufacturing. I was in human resources, and they wanted me to stay, and I wanted to go back to grad school. And I thought I wanted to be a marketer, and so the vice president of HR went to the marketing organization, and they said, look, we don't have an FTE for this engineer sales HR thing. And so we only are using our FTEs for either they had been reps in the field, they're ex-pharmacists, or they're an MBA trained marketer from one of the top universities. It can only be these 5 universities that we are primary target schools. And I didn't have any of those. And so the second, his name was Greg. Greg said, tell you what, almost the same thing. I'll keep her on the HR headcount for a year. And it was this internal internship. So I'll keep her on the HR headcount for a year. At the end of that year, you decide if you want to keep her, and then you put her on your books. If not, we'll happily take her back. Well, that year was the most amazing year for me because I got assigned. It's like, you're going to go into marketing big. I was part of a 5-person team that totally revamped their go-to-market strategy for the U.S. Subsidiary for Eli Lilly and Company, and that was about 1997, I think, and 26 years old, and revamping. And after that year, we totally revamped. We did benchmarking with retail companies, with some of the emerging companies. Some GE was one of them, Kodak at the time, that was still high at the time. And what do brand models look like, and how do you translate those into pharma? We did that, we re-engineered, everybody got promoted. They came to me after the 9-month project and says, what do you want out of it? And I says, I want to leave and go back to grad school. And I don't think anybody was expecting that. The next thing I know is I got a call from the CHRO, which is the chief HR officer, and says, we, ask you what you wanted. You were very forthright in saying what you wanted. And tell me why you want to get these degrees. And it may help to know, when I decided to go back, it wasn't just for the MBA that they had wanted me to get. I wanted to do a dual degree, and I also, for my own personal interest, wanted to pursue a divinity degree, a master's in divinity. And that ticket was 5 years for me being away because they didn't have a dual degree program at Vanderbilt. So I had to create it, which I did, and now it's a full-fledged dual degree program. And I wanted to, so I had these deliverables. I wanted to do both programs. It didn't exist, so I wanted it to be created. I wanted to take a year off because I thought being away 5 years was too long. I wanted the company to give me insurance benefits so that I would be covered and not take student insurance while I was away. And I wanted a stipend as a percentage of my paycheck while I was away. And they said yes to all of that. And so it's the first and only divinity degree that Lilly has ever paid for, and I'm sure they're still scratching their heads and saying, how did that happen? But when I came out, I went back, and it was a wonderful, I grew up there. I was there 16 years, almost 16 years. So that was how I was supported, and that's what it looks like for me to do for others.
So we touched upon this mentorship versus sponsorship. First of all, if you could help us understand the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, and then secondly, how did you, at such a young age, know how to ask for the sponsorship, or did you have to ask for it, or did you have to wait for it? Because it seems like you were confident enough to ask for what you wanted.
Yeah.
But first of all, help us
Not at
help us
22.
understand.
Yeah, not at 22. That's something that we continue to grow into, and I say I'm still growing into my confidence. So I'll start with the definitions, and this is my definitions. Others here may not agree or may agree, but mentors are people who talk to you about you, right? They give you advice. It may be tactical advice or very acute of how to solve this issue with my boss, or how to navigate this particular project or this business situation and difficulty. And they help you navigate, but it's very one-to-one. And normally they don't go outside of the confidential relationship that you've established with them, except if you ask them. I've had mentees to ask me, can you go test and see what my reputation is, or particularly if they're not in my organization, they may ask, what's the invisible barrier that's keeping me from advancing? And I may do some polling with people that they've worked for and bring the aggregated feedback back. But largely, it's a closed relationship that you simply ask advice on some type of situation. Sponsorship is way different. Sponsorship is the person that cascades or halos their organizational power on your behalf. They give their chits for you. They may have a role in their organization and they make it possible. I'll give a for example that I described with Paul Johnson. There was no way 18 months into my career that I can say, and it was a mandatory stay in your role 3 years, that I could exit out of engineering. Only a sponsor who had the power to make it happen could go to his peer, who was the VP of engineering, and saying, I want her to move, and I want her to move out of your organization, and I want you to pay her salary while she does it, right? I couldn't have made that stuff up. And so that's what sponsors do. And I've had every major leap in my career. I have counted at least 5, maybe 6 major pivots where it was a double level or something significant that I couldn't make happen through a mentor, where a sponsor says, I like what I see in you and I think you can do it, and they made that happen. So a sponsor is somebody who leverages their organizational power for you. And just like asking somebody to pay a bill for you, now I use this example, and it's a bad example because the audience was made way too young and they still ask people to pay their bills, but at a certain age you stop doing that. And so you can't ask a sponsor to give you their organizational power. What we can do, the best we can do, is be a superstar protege, which is what the parallel of a sponsor is, not a mentee, but a protege, and be found as a person that people want to be associated with. Because the little kept secret that may not be realized is that sponsors take a vested interest in your success. And in some instances, like GE, I don't know if there are GE people in the room, but when I was working at my last company, we actually benchmarked other programs of sponsorships. And at GE, you had to sign up and you were tracked and measured, and part of your rating on a year were how your proteges were performing in the organization. And so many times it's not that formalized. Some companies are moving closer to that model of having you actually voice. And if that's the case, that my success is contingent on you performing, then you can imagine that you have to be even more selective, even more careful about who you sign up to sponsor.
And so 3M has an actual sponsorship program internally?
Not formally, no,
Not
we
formally,
don't.
okay.
But do sponsorship protege relationships work? Are they operating today? Absolutely.
And then you have a few proteges as well?
I wouldn't say a few, but yeah, some.
Because, I mean, I would imagine it takes some vetting to decide who you want
I
to
will
invest
give,
some skin in the game
one
on.
example, because we have lots of 3Mers here. So I tend to use a previous example of a protege who, the organization, this is a Medtronic example. I do have one at 3M. I'll give 2. This is what it looks like when you know it's happening. So one of the biggest ones, I've written about it, blogged about it, and at one talk at International Women's Day, she actually made a video, and so I'm quite proud of that relationship, because we're now mentoring, but she's elevated and has a much bigger, more powerful sponsor than I was at the time. And she's still at Medtronic, and she was in the R&D organization, PhD scientist, but I noticed something about her. She was very curious. When we had global business teams meetings, she would always wait behind. She would be the one that was curious about the customer market research. She would be the one to raise her hand and be the first one to volunteer to go out and do the insights work directly and talk to the customers about whether it was a miniaturization project or other things. And I'm talking about over and above the product development cycle. I mean, talking to them, coming to advisory boards that may be on the clinical front or maybe on the KOL front. And she just had this curiosity and was so brilliant about, I just watched how she connected the dots to do her job better. And so when we reorged the organization and we went to these chief engineers, which were essentially the liaisons between the technical community, R&D, and the business side, I wanted to sponsor her to be that person for the business that I was leading. And the VP of R&D was absolutely against it, and not because of anything personal. He just believed that we had so many people who had been in the job longer. I think she was 5 years in with the company as well, and had been in the job longer, and it wasn't necessarily, it had nothing to do with the gender, but I'm always, particularly fond of women advancing as well, for obvious reasons. And she was just talented, and that was the trump card. She was just really good. And just doing time in line, in my opinion, is not sufficient for a big role like that. And he was absolutely adamant. And I can remember the day we had the last and final yelling match about it, and it was a yelling match in the parking lot at Rice Creek campus, and we were both screaming. And I was like, it's my team, and if I want her into this role, then it should be my call. And you should figure out a way of making it happen. And it was a 2-level promotion for her. So that was the other thing. We didn't do those often either. And so net, we kind of negotiated of what it would look like, what the messages were that we would deliver to the organization, why we made it happen. But she got into that role, and she was quite successful, and she's continued to advance into a full commercial R&D leadership role now. And so it was the absolutely right thing to do. Similarly not similar, it was a little different on the 3M side of coming into my former job. And so you have to know that at 3M, everything from director and above is considered executive level and has to be approved by the CEO and a subsection of our corporate operating committee. And we go through a lot of work to put together the packages to get somebody in. It's easier to move around once you're in the executive ranks and those decisions get made, but it's harder breaking in and justifying why. And so I had been in the role probably about 6 months, had seen the performance of one individual in particular, and thought it was time for them to be advanced and promoted to director. I was traveling at the time, which made it a little harder. And they said, Cindy, we know what you're planning about 2 more months to wait and see. But if you want to do it now, the committee is meeting on Thursday. They always meet on Thursdays and Fridays for whatever reason. And I remember I think I was in the UK somewhere trying to get the documents done, and it wouldn't go through, and it was a nightmare. But it was approved first try. And I got a call, it was the middle of the afternoon, the next afternoon, saying that the packet was so much information was in the documentation that it went through on first try. And I remember making the call, letting the individual know that she had been promoted. And what I did not know is that she was 3rd generation 3M, and her father had retired, her brother had worked there, and someone else in the family from generations gone by. And she said that was her father's dream, that somebody would make it to a director in their family. And so she says, this is not just for me, this is for our entire family. And so that was just a special moment.
That's great. So I want to kind of quickly go back to this business and divinity studies. Are those incongruous fields, or are they,
it depends on how you look at it. Yeah. So I'll say I don't compartmentalize myself that way. And the older I get, the more comfortable I am in my skin of just, this is it, right? This is just who I am. I have two teams of, and a total shout out to the 3M crew that's here because they came in for us tonight. And so I have not only that, a really high degree of accountability, so they can tell you later whether or not or to what degree it's true. When we did our assimilation and I came to introduce myself to the team, one of the things that's on every single slide of who I am as a business leader, and I love to read, and is the fact that I'm an ordained clergy. Now the joke about that is like, shoot, if our business strategies don't work, I'll just pray about it. Somehow we'll make our numbers, and we make our numbers. And so I don't necessarily compartmentalize myself that way. But I do believe that we as humans, as beings, that's part of my purpose on here. That's why I'm in healthcare. I believe that this is an industry that is so aligned to my purpose. And when we're growing, it's not just about the P&L. I think about it as how many patients that we're serving and how many more people that we're helping. And if you can make it a win-win, then the better off. I don't believe as a leader, so I'll give you the answer that the CHRO gave me 20 years ago when I requested for Lily to pay for me to go to Divinity school. And he said yes, and my first question is, why would you do that, right? I was just too naive and young to know that that was probably not the best question of looking a gift horse in the mouth. And I says, why would you do this? And his answer then was fortuitous because it's proven to be exactly the case. And he said, Cindy, we can go, and we do have the best MBAs in the world working at this company. But there is an element to your leadership that we believe will only be refined with your divinity and theological studies. And we want to see you be the best leader for this company that you can be. And I didn't understand it fully then. What was amazing to me is when I went back and got both degrees, there in any interview, nobody ever asked why. I was shocked by that. Like, I would see that resume and I was like, this is strange. No company ever asked. And I had 12 job offers when I graduated from both programs in corporations, not churches, but in corporations. And what I have found to be true of being comfortable operating in both of those spheres, I can usually tell pretty early on when something is going on with my employees. I think of myself as a 360 leader, that yes, I'm going to hold you accountable to the business priorities, but at the other time, I can see if it's a down day, is something going on in your family. I have had employees to come in my office and break down that I've prayed with, ask them if it's okay to have prayer. You know, it's not something that I advertise, but I want to make sure that they're getting the support to be the best. Because if you're your best person, you're going to be the best leader for the company that you can be. And I want to make sure that we're playing on all cylinders accordingly. And at the end of the day, we're here to deliver business results. But I get my best business results by building the best teams, by building the best people.
So I think some of this also is a theme of compassion. And we're in a very compassionate field, or you all are. I mean, we write about you. The healthcare industry talks a lot, and the medical technology industry talks a lot about patient care, that the patient comes first. And you know, we're having a national discussion here about access to care. And it's a global question, but I mean, in particular, to sort of news peg it, I mean, right now we're in the middle of this great dialogue about, you know, are we going to provide access to care to everyone that they can afford? And, you know, recently I was listening to an NPR program, and they talked about tech companies, and they talked about them in San Francisco, and that Google is investing, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars into building these campuses in the middle of the city, and how that kind of cascades and changes the dynamic of the city. And there's this kind of thought process like, well, hey, Google, you're one of the biggest companies in the world.
You're going to help.
You're coming into this town. A, we're not going to give you tax incentives to come, but B, what are you going to do to help us make a better city? So as we have this conversation about care and as a nation, I ask you as a steward of one of the big anchor companies in healthcare, do you think that we're doing enough to forward a discussion about access to care? Or do you think that, because I mean, the health insurance companies are clearly having this conversation,
Yes.
but do the medical technology, the pharma companies, do they need to get more involved in the access to care question?
And the answer is absolutely yes. right? And I think about the triple aim, which won't be new to anybody here in this audience. The triple aim of healthcare these days are increased access, better outcomes at a lower cost. And I don't think any segment of healthcare, not the providers, not the government, not the suppliers and manufacturers, no one can do it on their own. It has to be a unified effort in order to make that happen. You talked a little bit about, and I think about if you commit to being in healthcare, and I'm very proud that the aim of healthcare for 3M is part of its mission. So just so that everybody's clear, and I'm going to come back directly to the question, 3M is not a healthcare company. It is an integrated, a diversified, integrated industrial company with a healthcare channel. Okay, so be clear. So when you think about 5 distinct operating business areas of industrial, consumer, electronics, safety and graphics, and healthcare and consumer, we're one of those 5 segments. And as such, our vision for the company has to unify all the pieces of our enterprise. That said, the third element of our vision statement for the entire company is 3M Innovations Improving Every Life. Right? Now, even though we play, the first one is 3M Technologies Advancing Every Company, 3M Products Improving or Advancing Every Home, but the reality is that we are front and center as a healthcare enterprise in improving every life. There is no way, and we're very specific about that aim. When you say every, it's got to be every. If you go into places that can't afford, we have one of the biggest and strongest 3M gives in the products and in countries at the lower tiers where they can't afford our products. We do have compassionate use through our foundation and other things, through our corporate social responsibility, which is big in our developed as well as our developing markets, that companies and society and can take advantage of, and we're very proud of that. So we take that aim seriously, but can we do more? Absolutely. Not to be a cheerleader, we've done a lot, but we've not done enough. And I think that the only way that we can continue to think about our pipeline, we tend to play at the premium end of the spectrum, but we've got to think about the entire pyramid, as most of us develop and sell and do marketing campaigns across the pyramid. What does that mean into the developing countries? And all of those strategies won't be the same. The margins won't be the same. And we have to ensure that we do well while doing good. And what I mean by that, there is a way through mix and through other things of advancing your growth, because every company is in business to grow, to enhance for those public companies like we are, to increase and improve shareholder value. But there is a way of doing well and doing good for society at the same time. And the best leaders are those that embrace that challenge. It's not easy. It's increasingly difficult in healthcare all over the world. Just because we're wrestling with the Affordable Care Act here in the US, every single market has challenges with how to pay and these unsustainable growth of their healthcare spend as a % of GDP. And we've got to come together with these governments, which we are all over the world, to figure out how to reach more of their populations.
And our industry in general, do you think it's involved enough in this current conversation?
I can't speak to every company. What I can say is part of some of the trade organizations that we're part of are having those. It was most acute, the last business that I ran, we participated. They've changed their name, so forgive me, but it was the Generic Pharmaceutical Association at the time. And that was a front and center of the discussions. I think devices it's most acute in pharma, I think. Now I can see those conversations emerging, kind of the bleeding effect, haloing into devices as the price of devices kind of next in the queue. But because of the advancement and in the technology, I think it hasn't been as acute as it will be, and certainly not under the same scrutiny as what pharma has been and is today. But I continue to see the haloing and the advancing of those conversations. And device, I think, we have to fix it and talk about it. I was just as a shout out, at the Piper Jaffray Heartland Summit just last week, and I think I see a lot of people who were there as well. But that was a significant part of the conversation. What is the combined conversation of industry with the providers, with the government? The director of the CMS Innovation Center was there and talked about how can industry be incentivized to increase access, and how more and more companies are starting to have risk share models for increased value. I think as we have the conversation around value, that a natural pivot from that conversation is access as well. Yeah.
So you lead the infection prevention business at 3M?
Yep.
That's there's got to be some instances where you come home and you are a little bit scared about what you're hearing in terms of infectious disease and I mean, I think they said it takes 10 years to develop an antibiotic and 1 year to develop a resistance. It seems that your division is really on one of the most quickest growing and perhaps scariest frontiers of healthcare. What are some of the issues that you take home with you at night when you
Well, I
think
hope
about
I'm not
this
taking
space?
them home. That would be scary if I am. But some of the issues around, for example, I'll take one aspect, is surgical site infections, that keeps me up at night, is of all the work that we're doing, and we're doing really great work taking the WHO, the World Health Organization's guidelines, which were published last November, on the 27 different areas of minimizing or mitigating surgical site infections. But here's the reality, is most of the aspects in terms of the patient, what a patient brings into them with the OR or what they pick up in the hospital, we can't control. Even on our best day with our best products, there are so many factors that lend itself for infections. How do we basically communicate and articulate the value of all of our products when over 50% of the contributing factors are outside of our control? And so that's why we are interested in partnering with some of the large health systems and saying, can we do some studies together? Can we look at processes to not only improve workflow, but to reduce the overall risk infections? And we're going into hospitals all around the world. We've been with ministries of health where they're like, we want you to look at every single one of our hospitals. And quite honestly, we're not set up to do mass assessments in that. We're trying one at a time, but to look at their processes and their procedures in the operating room and saying, where are some of the risk in terms of whether it's in the OR directly or in their device sterilization, central sterilization departments, where we can help partner with them to reduce the overall risk. And how do we control the controllables? And if we drive those down, then we know where the other risk factors are. But I think that that's one of the things that keeps me up. 1 in 10 patients will develop, an SSI or a hospital-acquired infection, and that's scary. 1 in 10. So for every 10 people, and it would require, I think the last number that I saw to the U.S. system alone in a single given year is over $91 billion in, hospital-associated infections and complications. And how do you begin to drive that down? And that's magnified from a global basis. And so the cost is high, but all the factors in terms of reducing it are multivariate. And no one company, no one product can do it alone. But as we talk about our care pathways, our greatest hope is that we're chipping away at the problem to reduce overall mortality, reduce overall infection rates, certainly where we can control them.
Because it's a tremendous drag on the cost of the healthcare system.
Absolutely,
it's
it
probably
is.
the leading driver, is it not? Surgical site infections, sepsis, these things that secondary infections.
Well, what I understand, and my team is here going to whisper in my ear, I just saw it today, if you aggregate all of them together, it's the third largest infections, or the third largest cause of death in the U.S., displacing respiratory diseases and after cardiovascular and other things. Yeah.
That's startling.
It is. Startling and true.
Yeah. So where's the innovation coming from in your space?
Oh, I'm glad that you asked. So I think that's one of the things that everybody that I know I have a lot of friends here that I've worked with over the years, and they're like, are you having fun? One of the things I can say, 3M is like a virtual candy land. And there are 46 technology platforms, but over 100,000 patents, and there's so many innovations happening all the time. And anything that you want to explore or innovate with, I think about, not only the business that I'm in, but the business I've been in, is that we went out to Silicon Valley and we ran hackathons, and I didn't even know what a hackathon was before we went out. And we start creating these accelerator teams, and in particular, within 30 days, the team had 5 patents to file, which was a first in the history of 3M to file that many, have that many applications ready to be filed after 30 days. But the innovation starts with the pain points of having intimate relationships with our customers. What are the pain points? And then coming back and saying, not only what's in my division, but when I look across all 24 divisions at 3M, the corporate labs are over, like I said, 100,000 patents. Inside of 3M, how can we collectively solve this pain point? So we're going through an exercise right now of saying, what are the pain points that are costing the healthcare system the most money, agnostic to 3M? It doesn't matter if we play in them today, if we're good at them or not. What are the areas that are causing the greatest pain points today that a little movement would have a huge dent in, not only from an economic standpoint, but also in clinical outcomes? And then we'll further innovate in saying these are great opportunities to go and play. I was just with one of our top 20 customers this morning, so I started the morning really, really early on my way to a customer meeting. And they were talking about the same things. How can we innovate together? And some of that is just having dialogues and open up the kimonos about, well, what are your surgery infection rates today, and are you willing to share that? And so, one of the things that was startling is the national average is much higher than the 1.25. We're well over it. So when you come to us and you say we can reduce the national average, it means nothing to us because we're already optimized against that. So the value hurdle is much higher. So innovation starts with understanding and having intimate relationships with where the customers are, what they need to be innovative. And if you can figure out a win-win, something that's in your core capability, not just because of my portfolio, that's very limited, but how can we bring all of 3M to bear? And sometimes, I'll be honest, there's so much at 3M and so much to the customer. It's just about getting the right teams of people together to have the right conversations to know how can I best innovate to solve your problem. Not we can innovate to the reputation and the brand for being one of the best leaders in the industry is absolutely true. But to do it in an efficient way that has the biggest opportunity and solves the healthcare's biggest problems only are going to come by understanding those deep fundamental needs in and out of infection prevention. But that's certainly one way to get started that we're already playing.
Excellent. So you are, at least 2 of your predecessors were women.
Yes.
And so you're in a company whose CEO has directly credited the growth of your stock price and the performance over the past 5 years to the efforts at diversity. You talk about contextual intelligence a lot and sort of seeing the question behind the question. I have to be honest, sometimes when I hear diversity, I start to buzzword out a little bit. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about diversity, what are we really talking about when companies say they're committing to diversity?
So I'll say one thing. Diversity means nothing. Everybody thinks of that as a quota, right? And starts the eye rolling, and we've been working, I think, and it may be another buzz, but I think a much more meaningful buzzword is inclusion. I want to have a table that regardless of who's sitting around it, that everybody feels free to speak up and that they would articulate concerns, and that they would be heard. They trust that when they speak up, they will be heard. And I will say, as a woman of color, that has not always been the case. So some of what you call my confidence has been a learned behavior when I wasn't feeling heard, of just demanding, and we can go into that another time, but something that my family just embedded in me you deserve to be heard. And I grew up with that mantra. And so one of the things that's important, and there has been so many studies that have been done by the McKinseys of the world, by the Bains of the world, by Catalyst. So thank you for the shout out by our CEO. That quote actually came when he was on a panel at Catalyst, which is a big research firm that out of New York that researches the advancement of women in corporations, and they are a phenomenal partner. They do customized original research, by the way, too, so a shout out for them. But they give out awards for companies that are advancing women in their organizations. And 3M won their very prestigious award. We were also the #1 company for millennials last year. So ahead of Google, ahead of Apple or Alphabet, whomever Google is today. And many of the talks that I gave in the months following that, everybody wanted to know what 3M is doing to attract the millennials. We have a big group here, so welcome to do interviews afterwards of what we're doing. But keeping it fresh, letting them work on things that matter, being sure to make them feel included, that their voices are heard. A big group of our millennials were flown to Chicago just in February. They did it. We have an executive development program with not only our operating committee, but the game changers in the organization, the highest level leaders in the corporation, and they had a team of about 7, I think, millennials saying, what do we need to know? What do you need? And it's not all the stereotypes. They don't want to work and they want to be vice president tomorrow. It's everybody, regardless of which generation stage you are, want to contribute meaningfully and wants to be recognized. And inclusion gets you there. And there's been enough research to say companies with the highest level of diversity and inclusion have better business results and outcomes in a significant, not incremental, but marginal, significant impact in their growth. Because the more people you get around the table, the more ideas you have. And the last thing that I'll say about it is, in my mind, diversity is more about the leader than it is about the employees, because it takes a special kind of leader to put all kind of rambunctious, ideal, fearless, courageous, conversation-having people around their leadership table and listen to them. And one of the things, and I hope I don't get in trouble when I say it, but I do say this back at the ranch, and I've always said it, is that typically in very hierarchical organizations, you get all the leaders together and then they just nod to whatever the highest ranking person in the room is saying. And that is a very dangerous proposition, because it's diversity, but it's not inclusion. And so one of the things that I say to my leadership team is, when we come together, I never render my opinion until I go around and hear what they think. And I've learned that over the years, because I know, being the executive in the room, that they will tend to agree with what I said, or I'll shape the nature of the conversation if I answer first. So I really try to, not only do I not answer first, but give no indication of what I support and believe. And that's really hard, because I'm so expressive, as you can tell. And then I'll render an opinion or thoughts at the end for that reason. Because I really do. And my saying is that if you can't hold an opinion that may be different than everybody else's in the room, you don't deserve to have your feet under this leadership table. And I absolutely believe that. I want fearless, courageous leaders who can go anywhere in the company and be fearless, courageous leaders again. I will say that I had one of my peers say to me once that, you know, Cindy, you're ruining your leadership team. And I said, so why is that? And he said, because they're going to go and they're going to think that they have a voice and go to other leaders who aren't prepared and is evolved to listen to them as you are. And you know what? That's just a chance we'll have to take. Yeah.
And so I read some of the stats. The executive mix is over 20% female.
23.4, but who's counting? 24.3, but who's counting, yes.
That's good.
Yeah.
It's good, but it's still
We got work to do.
67%. I'm not a math guy, but it's 67%.
Well, what's the national average?
In med tech companies?
No, period. We're diversified healthcare. So you're quoting.
You're ahead of the curve.
So,
for sure.
so I'll say that it's not enough, but recognizing progress. And I'll give my own experience. So I have been involved with advancing women, I kid you not, since I probably came out of the womb, but largely in corporations since the day I graduated and had my first job as an engineer in the cornfields of Indiana. So it's always been important to me, especially being an engineer. We weren't often at the table. But what I would say is a couple of things. Only 5% of Fortune 500s, percent of Fortune 500s are led by women, and that number has gone down in that we were rising. In the last 10 years, it's been stagnant and now starting to slip back closer to 4%. Those in the C-suite is about 15% as a national average. And when I came, my personal story is when I came to 3M, I can remember the night before, our top officers meeting is called Executive Conference. And it's the top 100 leaders in the corporation. Most people are surprised that with a company our size of 91,000 employees around the globe, that we only have 100 executives leading the enterprise across the world. And so we decided that wouldn't it be great if we had a dinner for the women executives and talk about issues that are particular to us and how we wanted to show up. Because even when we come, we tend to cluster, we tend to be silent, even at the officers meeting, and people might be surprised to hear that. So how did we agreed to hold each other accountable to how we were going to show up at the officers meeting the next day. And we were so proud and we filled one dinner table. Right? And they actually had to put in 2 chairs, but it was still just 12 of us. And it was my 3rd day with the company, so I was the newbie. And the last one we had last fall, we held a dinner, and it was 3 tables and had our own room. We had to rent out a room. And we looked around for those of us who had been there just 3 years prior, because I've only been with the company 3 years. And even though it's not where we'll ultimately be, that amount of progress in such a short amount of time only comes with a leader who's absolutely committed, that sets the right tone at the top. And I'm proud to be at 3M with a leader that's that committed. To be quite frank, it's one of the only reasons that I came. I was doing very well at a company that I love, but when asked, can you help come and change not only the face of healthcare, but the way we do things as an enterprise and be a change agent at a Fortune 50 company, those opportunities don't come around but once in a lifetime. So, yeah.
And 3M has not one but 2 groups to support African American workers as well. Is that correct?
Well, the AEN is the Employee Resource Network, but we have over 12, I think, 17, I forget the latest count, 17 Employee Resource Network groups. And so we call them ERNs. Some companies call them Employee Resource Groups or Affinity Groups or Empowerment Groups, however you want to say it. I chaired the Women's Leadership Group before, but we have Women's Leadership Affinity Groups. We've got one for every racial. We have LGBTQ affinity group at 3M. So every affinity population is supported through shared resources at the corporation to advance, but ultimately it's not just to support the employees' personal interests, but to advance them as employees and as people so that they can then advance the mission of the company.
And when we talk about inclusion, talk about diversity, are we attracting enough? Do we have enough people of color in the medical technology space? I would think probably not.
Look at the microcosm that we have here. I mean, not to put us on the spot, but look around the room and what do we see? Mm-hmm. And it's not a bad thing. It's not a better or worse. It's just inclusiveness. And the one thing that's important is that it's not a criticism of what has, and I firmly believe when you know better, you kind of do better. And it's not because, and I'll give a firm example. Look at what we're seeing happening at Uber. One of my friends just signed on, not with Uber, but with Lyft, to be a consultant at Lyft. And one of the things that she shared with me without sharing too much is that, Cindy, they said that they can't find diverse talent. Would you come in and just speak to their executive team? Not because I'd ever worked there, but just to say it's possible. And where are we living, or where are we looking for talent? And one of the things, for those that have ever read Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, it's ripe with, I'm not saying that everything's right about it, but one of the postulates, which is very well researched out of Stanford, is that they took a resume and they took the same exact resume, put a male name on top of the resume, put a female's name on top of the same exact resume, and the male resume, more often than not, 9 times out of 10, would get live interviews scheduled, and nothing had changed but the name. And with the female, the kinds of things that came up when they were reviewing that resume was, well, she hasn't had enough experience. Well, this is too big, and this is a stretch, and we're taking a chance. And honestly, when we're doing talent reviews, I hear all those things. And one of the best bosses I ever had, and now I try to play the same role, not alone, is listening to, for all of those that have the privilege of advancing talent, when you're sitting into the talent reviews, listening to the conversations that are taking place. And I'll give one example that I was privy to, that my boss, who was a male leader, he actually raised his hand and called out. And I'll be honest, I was ashamed as a woman leader sitting in that room that I wasn't the one that either made the observation or raised my hand. And it was a pivotal moment in my leadership. And so we were talking about two directors, and we were working on a quality issue, and we were needing somebody to quickly assemble a team and do some pretty quick turnaround on some urgent issues. And we were talking about the background of the male, and we start saying, you know, using things like proven experience, and they were both proven. And when we talk about the woman, we were talking about it was a stretch assignment, has she done it before, and we wanted every single I dotted and T crossed of, well, how many years did they, I mean, we didn't go into that granularity. And finally, my SVP said, I need to call an audible. Did you just hear what we just did? And everybody was kind of shocked. Even me was like, what did we just do? We're in trouble, but I'm not quite sure why we're in trouble. And he says, listen to the language that we used. Even the HR VP in the room didn't, you know, make an observation. And that was the moment, and I apologized to him. I can't tell you how ashamed I was, because I would hope that somebody in the rooms that when my name came up was listening for that too. And so I committed to him thereafter, and certainly bring that with me to every single talent review that I do at 3M, and every single one is listening for the language that we use. Are we using the same language? Is everything a stretch? Is it a risk? Those are trigger words, and we should all be accustomed to trigger words. And sometimes it's true and it's accurate and it's fair. You pause, you consider, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess it is. But it should be equitably used regardless of the gender of the talent that we're talking about. But at the end of the day, it's to advance all talent, but it is possible that 50% of that talent could be female. And shame on us, because if you look at entry level, every single organization, more often than not, has 50% gender diversity in their organizations. But what happens as you move up the organization, those ranges and the levels mix starts to change pretty dramatically. On average, it's 2.1. It's 2.1% men increase to CEO 2 times faster on average, starting from entry level in every successive move. However, if you look at those in the C-suite and the likelihood of advancing to CEO, it's actually 5x. It's 5x more likely to 2 executives in the C-suite to get to CEO being a male than not. And so we have to look at the pipeline and what we're doing all through the pipeline of advancing talent. But here's the deal, the reality. If you're paying 50% and you're bringing and doing a lot, there is a war on talent, by the way, particularly in the tech, med device areas. If we're having these kind of conversations, paying to recruit this high talent in from Silicon Valley or wherever we're bringing them from. Austin is another hotbed. Boston is another hotbed for device talent. And paying to bring all this high-po talent in, wouldn't we want them to contribute and feel heard at the highest levels that they possibly can and feel rewarded and recognized? And so it would be shame on us as executives if we go out and bring this talent in and then we marginalize them or put them in a box so that they can't contribute at their fullest. It would have been a waste. And maybe the last thing that I'll say about that was one of the things that I was told. It was kind of a shot in the middle of the forehead for me in coming to 3M, because I worried about triggering the antibodies. And I know that my change agility is extremely high, and you know, I come in and I tend to see the holes in what needs to be fixed, and I'm ready to go. But I also knew I was the first female ever hired in as an executive in the history of 3M. I didn't know that until after I got there. 6 months after I got there, somebody asked me that question of what's it like to be the first female hired in at an executive level. And I was like, I don't know what it feels like, because I don't think that's true. And literally, I was sitting with my communications manager, and he looked at me and raised his shoulders, and I didn't know. And so we just said, so why don't you go ahead and write the story, and we'll do a fact check and call you when we find out the truth. So we called the global HR, and they says, yeah, Cindy, you're the first one. And I says, well, okay, now, I understand, but it actually made me even more paranoid. I was afraid to do something that was too different, that maybe I'll trigger the antibodies and I die and I be too much of a change catalyst. So I tried to do everything the right way. And it was we just made an executive change, so I'm going to get it wrong. It was our now vice chairman, who was the EVP of International. He pulled me to the side. I was a year in, and he says, why aren't you moving faster? And I said, well, what did you want me to have done? He says, well, what's your vision for the organization? What do you think we need to be working on? And I went down the chain. Here's some things that I would change. I would change some of our innovation models. I would make it easier for us to work with the corporate labs. I would look at some of the digital into our materials, because we're a materials company and we need to be faster and advance the ball more significantly in digital. Here's some ideas that I had. And we're primarily a subsidiary model, but we need to have some regional models. And here's what I would look at. And his eyes got as big as saucers. And he says, well, if you know that, why aren't you doing some of that? And I says, well, sometimes you got to go slow to go fast. And he says, Cindy, let me just say this. And I had a different conversation with the CEO who said essentially the same thing in not so gracious words. He says, if you try to behave the way 3Mers behave, it would have been a waste of our time to go get you. It would have wasted our time for you to come and do what you can never do perfectly, like people who've been here 25 and 28 years. You will never amass that type of experience in short order. We got you to be a provocateur. And so it kind of gave you permission, but it's still a razor's edge. How do you lead change from the inside out? That you have to know enough of the standards, procedures, operating mechanics, right? The unwritten rules of the workplace, so that you don't fall off the edge. You got to. You have to know how to be the Pied Piper. And that's what I said. I said, I've got to be credible enough that when I decide to run fast, I look back and there's somebody behind me. That's what I told the CEO. And you could tell that that was a new consideration. 3 months later, when that window of opportunity came, we hit the accelerator. We got 8 different businesses across the enterprise working together that led to those filings of those patents that I mentioned earlier. And then he asked me to come and talk to the entire executive officers, executive conference, about the thinking of what goes into thinking about the business differently and being willing. We tend to try, particularly in medical devices, well, maybe not every company, our medical device model is that we build business plans and marketing plans about having the best widget possible so that we can maximize adoption at launch, as opposed to doing the software method. The software method is a series of iterations, get the minimal viable prototype out into working prototype into the market, and then iterate your way up. That way you don't over-engineer it. We put so much money in it and are disappointed, and if you look at our curves, and trust me, I've been in enough organizations and have seen these curves across multiple companies and industries. If you look at the launch plan for 3 years before and then what happened 3 years after, those curves rarely match. You had these big slopes of growth, and then it may do okay, but even wildly successful, it doesn't look like what you said it was going to be. And that's because we tend to oversteer. And we put a lot more, we are some wild engineers. 3M has some of the best scientists, best engineers. I thought I was a nerd before, and now I realize I'm not even close in the ballpark of the brain trust that exists on that campus in Maplewood. And I look at that, we can do anything, and we get so excited about the technology, and we go too far because it may oversteer on customer needs, and then we're disappointed that we can't sell a new feature or benefit or a new knob or a new bell. They're not willing to pay for it, 1. And 2, oftentimes most technologies get underutilized. And so by doing the agile, lean innovation, we really can get that sweet spot of engineering just enough of what we're going to get rewarded for and to meet the customer's needs. And we know when we've hit that threshold. And so lean innovation has been one way of accelerating, but it's also been a way of going fast. And now, and the last thing I'll say about that, of now getting to the point 3.5 years in, where the head, and we've just had a change there too, our chief technology officer said, what's your next great idea? We know you're bankable, so you tell us what you need and we'll invest in it. And so we did. The business is getting a lot of corporate love and a lot of corporate support because they keep winning and demonstrating the ability to meet the customer demand and be agile with speed at the same time. And so I'm just so excited to be part of these teams, that all we need is a little right sizing and a support to move the barriers out of the way, and anything is possible.
Well, you've given us a ton to think about tonight.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I'm excited about technology.
No, I
I'm
can tell.
excited
It's
about
wonderful.
diversity. Yeah.
So I promised you we could take a couple questions from the
Couple,
audience.
because I know the evening is waning.
Do you guys want to ask a couple questions, or?
So I have an 18-year-old daughter who's about to graduate or has graduated from high school, and she's ready to launch and going off to college. And some of the things you were saying are just so wonderful and inspiring for a father to pass down to a daughter. Can you tell me how your father was or your family was to help you when you were ready to fly, and sort of advice they gave you?
First of all, the fact that you're even asking and concerned is amazing within itself. So I am a reformed, not a 3M story, but a reformed actress / psychiatrist. That's what I thought I was going to do. And my mother, in particular, staged an intervention with my guidance counselor my junior year of high school. And they said, and I was born and raised Nashville, Tennessee, and they said, you're a little brown girl from the South that's really good in math and science. There is no way you're going to do anything but engineering. Now, you get to pick what kind of engineering, but engineering is it. And so, then it became a path of going to another summer programs. I was always enrolled in some college program while I was in high school and getting exposure to campuses in engineering, and fell in love with industrial because it paired my humanistic side with the operational, and it felt more real to me. And so after that, she said she's about to graduate from high school. So it became finding schools, and I think I applied to Vanderbilt because it was at home, Northwestern, and Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech and Northwestern were the only ones with industrial engineering programs. Then it became where I was going to get the most money. But they have always been extremely, I kid you not, my father has every press clipping I've ever received. I still carry, and I get a little emotional, but I promise, and I'm happy to show you. When I was 16, my father gave me a pet rock that says, "Make it happen," that stays with me to this day. And so that is amazing, the amount of support, right, and self-actualization that can mean, that there is a place when I feel dumb and crazy everywhere else in the world, that in Daddy's eyes I'm still a smart cookie, and it does reinforce it. And as much as any leader, we always tend to never show a chink in the armor. I don't subscribe to that. There are days that I don't feel so fearless. There's a days that my cape aren't flying so high. And there are days when I think that I've just shot it for the day and it wasn't my best day as an executive. I said something wrong. I didn't present quite as well. And on the way home, I still called my father. So creating that place of safety and reinforcement, of getting back out there, right, of the pet rock moment, whatever yours might be, will be one of those important. And the biggest thing with daddies is don't give the answers. Man, my husband and my father are alike in that. I'm like, I'm telling you so that you can acknowledge that you heard me. Don't give me the answer. Yeah. So that would be it. I'm still thinking about the funny moment. I'm sure I fell off something. I said something crazy and nobody corrected me, but I don't know. There have been plenty. I'm self-effacing that I probably look stupid and didn't even know it. So I don't know.
We'll take that offline. Cindy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Let's give her a warm round of applause.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Guys, thank you so much. This concludes our first day of Device Talks. We're going to be be back at it tomorrow morning. Breakfast will be served at 7 o'clock, and then we have an incredible day of programming. Thank you all again for coming tonight. Thank you, Cindy, for those really insightful, incredible remarks. A lot to digest. I have a 5-year-old daughter. I definitely should have asked the question about the daughter, but we'll get that next time. Thank you again, everybody. Good night. Thank you.